Hey everyone, it's Baga here. Welcome to another weekend workshop. Today we're going to be taking a special look at how to shade. Now, I've said this before in the past, and I'm going to say it again here. What I teach isn't necessarily the only way to do something. The way I showed you how to do perspective drawing or how to be a better writer, that wasn't necessarily the only way to go about those. And this is definitely not the only way to go about shading. Now, I am going to show you a few tricks for some very simple shading, just the basics. As you would go on, things would get a little more complicated, etc., etc. But before we get into the actual drawing part, I want to talk about a few different drawing tools that you might use for something like this. Now, you might go ahead and just use a regular number 2 pencil, like so. This is just, this is good for basic drawing. It's not anything special, it's not the greatest. This is a number 2 graphite pencil, and in the terms of art pencils, this is what's considered an HB. Now, another way you can go about drawing is by using these art pencils. Now, for shading, what I want to do is I want to look at an actual object that has some directed light on it. In this case, I'm using the natural light that's coming from my window. And the object I'm going to use is simply a box that I had lying around. The reason I chose this is because it is, in fact, a box. It is a rectangular prism. It's a very basic shape. It's a very geometric shape. The straight lines, the flat sides, means the shading is going to be broken down very easily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a pencil, and just to start with this, I'm going to grab an HB pencil. Your basic, what would be a basic number 2 pencil. Now the reason I'm choosing this is because what I'm going to do to start is I'm going to do a very light line drawing. And I will apologize now if this line drawing does not show up on the video. I will zoom in a little bit more so you can see the paper as opposed to me, because this is what's important. But you'll be able to see everything once the shading happens. Alright, so I'm going to look at this box, and what I can notice right off the bat is it's just basic 2-point perspective when I look at it. We've already covered 2-point perspective, so this should just be a review. I'm not going to go explaining it. But I'm going to go ahead and start, and I'm not using a ruler. This is just a sketch. I'm going to do this lightly. And I'm going to find the angles for this, what would be the vanishing, going to what would be the vanishing point. Because I'm standing above it, I can easily see the top of the box. Unfortunately, when I stand at an angle to paper, I can't see if my lines are straight or not. So we have the basics of the box, and you can basically see that. Now, when I look at this box, I've got the light coming in from its left side. And what I like to do is I like to assign numbers to the, like a scale, 1 to 10. 1 is the lightest, 10 is the darkest. 1 would be white, 10 would be black. And when I look at this, I have 3 sides that I can see. I can see the left side, I can see the right side, and I can see the top. Now there's no curves, there's 1 light source, so it's going to be 3 different shades. Now if this were curved, it would be much more complex, but we're going for simple here. So I can look at this, and the lightest side I see is the left side. Now I'm not going to assign it a 1 because it's not white. It is, however, I would say maybe a 3. And I would say the top, which is the second lightest, is probably a 4. And then the right side is probably a 6. It's not that, it's darker, but it's not horribly darker. So what I'm going to do is, if this is a 3, this is a 4, and this is a 6, I know that the left side is half as dark as the right side. So that's a good indicator. So when you shade this, if it doesn't end up like that, you're definitely going to want to, fix that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to still use this HB pencil. And I'm going to start shading in the left side, which is my lightest side. Now, I will say this before I even start. When you're shading, shade everything in the same direction. Now, technically, yes, you can go and change if you've got different planes, but it looks better if it's all going in the same direction. If you just start doing it in random directions, it's scribbling, it's not shading. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to shade in this left side. I'm going to shade it in as evenly as possible. I'm going to shade it lightly, what would be a 3 in my opinion. And then we'll be able to move on to the other ones. Now as I do this, I kind of have to look at this and ask myself, am I happy? Now one thing I like to do is I like to shade in a diagonal direction. That's just personal preference. And one thing you should definitely always do when shading is do not use the tip of your pencil. Use the side. Now the more shading you end up having to do and the harder you press down, the more times you're going to actually have to sharpen your pencil. Now one thing I'm going to say before just shutting up and doing this is if you go outside the lines for this, don't worry. You're going from lighter to darker, and so if you keep the same direction every time you shade, it's going to just get darker, so you'll cover up anything that overlaps. And if you go outside of the box, we're going to clean that up with an eraser at the end, and it won't really matter. Alright, so as you can see, the left side of this is shaded. Now, it might look like the right side for you, but in reality it's the left side. And it's all even, and it's fairly within the lines. I'm kind of happy with that. Now what I'm going to do, since I'm using all these different art pencils, is for the 4, which is just kind of one step up, I'm just going to move up a step in the pencil. So I'm going to use a B pencil. I went from HB, now I'm going to B. And I'm going to do the same exact thing I did, but on the top side. I'm going to go in the same direction. I'm going to try to keep it as close to within the lines as possible. And that's going to be that. So, I'll see you in a minute. So there we go. We've got this side, the left side for me, and the top. And you can already tell that this is just a little bit darker than that. Now the last side, I'm moving all the way up to a 6B. Now I'm going to kick it down. I'm going to go 4B. Because remember, this isn't black, and the 6B is really, really dark. So with the 4B, I can get a much darker shade, but I don't have to, be super, super careful with what I do with it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to shade this last side, and then we'll see what we have. Alright, so there you have it. There is your basic rectangular box. Shaded, you can see clearly the different shades. And it's just really about paying attention to what's light and what's dark. Now there is one other thing I'm going to do to this. Well, two other things. Now when I look at this, there are spots where I have, say, overlapping sides or along some of the edges where there is a darker shade. Because one of the key things to understand is there's not really lines in objects like this. Lines are just kind of, a lot of times, our brain's interpretation of edges. So we have an edge here and an edge here and an edge here, etc. But we don't really have lines there. Now there are sometimes shadows that are created that give us a thicker and darker edge. So we can look at that and we can try to see where that is. And I see one that runs the entire length up here. So I can go ahead, and I want it to be darker than my darkest side. And for on this box, it's definitely thickest on the edges. There's also a thin, broken dark spot, or dark line, I guess you could call it, along this edge, as well as this bottom, because this bottom is where the darkest stuff is actually going to be because of the table that it's sitting on. And if I look, there's a couple darker areas up here, but not that much. So the last thing you should really do is just clean up the edges. And voila! Here we have a simple object that has been shaded. All that it requires is paying attention to the values that you see, the differences between light and shadow. In my personal case, I like to give numbers to those, give values, so that I can have a reference to what I'm actually shading. So I can say, you know what? That's not really dark enough there. So that's all we're going to look at for this week. Join us on Tuesday. I don't work Tuesday. Join us on Tuesday for The Wide World of Geek. And I will see you guys later. Bye.